Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you very much for having me here at this very interesting dialogue. I'll start with some good news, and that basically refers to the presentation that Hans-Helmut Kotz gave when he pointed out the asymmetric developments in the Eurozone and the different developments in competitiveness. And the good news is, I mean, this is bad news as such, but the good news is that everyone within the Eurozone seems to agree that this is one of the major problems we have to cope with within the currency area. This was not always so. When the Euro celebrated its 5th birthday, so 5 years ago, first data was on the table that there were these tendencies in cyclical divergences and other aspects. And at the time, on the political level, the most shared answer still was that this would just, in a way, hopefully go away without having to adopt the framework of policy coordination to a certain or important degree. Now we are in the middle of the debate of how we have to change and reinforce the surveillance mechanisms, and I think this is one of the positive points where we stand, that this is really common sense and people are working on this. But of course, there's bad news because the debate is moving forward only very slowly. The reasons are political, and here is what Pavel Svoboda said in his introductory remarks. Where do we stand with the political will of developing the Eurozone further, of changing, maybe adapting its architecture to the developments we have seen under the crisis? And here I'd like to emphasize what we are seeing is not new as such, but it has just been emphasized by the crisis. So this is a debate which is as old as the discussion on the Maastricht Treaty and before. What kind of political coordination do we need to accompany the monetary policy? Now, the proposal that is on the table and that is already being implemented is the surveillance of competitiveness of the national member states. This is happening. I think it is very important. And Dr. Merz said that the question is how can we enforce what maybe the Commission or the ECOFIN then adopts as a recommendation to the countries. Here's a strong parallel to the problems we are facing with the Stability and Growth Pact. We are in a field where there has been no transfer of sovereignty, where there's a lot of common sense in the recommendations, but where in the end the question whether it will be implemented or not depends on the political will of the member states in question. And in the past, where mostly fiscal policy was in the focus of those recommendations, we have seen the conflict potential that is inherent in the system, which in a way has also led to the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact to give it more flexibility and to increase the common sense in the regulatory framework. But now we are again heading for this situation. I'm not saying that the Stability Pact has to be reformed again, but where we ask ourselves, do we touch limits with the idea of having recommendations, only having pretty weak sanctioning mechanisms in the sense that they are there on the paper, but that the political implementation still depends on the common will of the member states to do so. There are other proposals on the table how to cope with this problem, and some of them see like a big political illusion because they imply a huge political will in the end to really transfer either sovereignty to the European level or to enable the Eurozone to transfer more money between the member states. And Hans-Helmut Kotz has also pointed this out as a possible way out, but of course we are very far from this idea. So my very modest remark here is we are heading for, we are already in a debate on the future of the European budget. We are very far from discussing whether the European budget as such should have a macroeconomic component, but from, of course, an academic point of view, this would be the place where the problem could be tackled. What at least should be taken into account, in my view, is the question, has the European budget in the past, in some regards, even strengthened or and enforced the problems we are seeing. And you can make the argument that the way the structural policy has been functioning, for instance, in the case of Spain, it has indeed fueled the boom. That is part of the problem Spain is facing now. So here's the question or the suggestion. Let's discuss whether within the probably remaining framework of the next European budget, we can take into account the macroeconomic dimension by turning small screws, and keep on the horizon the question whether in the long run the Eurozone needs an element of fiscal stabilization on the top level. Another proposal is obviously, which is linked to the monitoring aspect, in how far within the Eurozone the external balance of the member countries should play a role. There are countries which strongly argue for this point. Those are the ones who have lost competitiveness. And then there are others, for instance, Germany, who do not have an interest to put this on a table as an object of surveillance, because the opinion that is dominant in Berlin is that it's part of your homework you have to do. I'm saying this only in a few words, but I think this is where the political conflict really lies. It is a matter of national policy reform you have to take, then you increase your competitiveness. But those countries who are in a strong position have no interest to be lectured, not to sort of be in that strong position, but to have their position weakened. On the other hand, there's the argument coming from those countries who have lost competitiveness that there is a common responsibility, and then Article 99 of the European Community Treaty, which says that economic policy is a matter of common concern for all countries, comes into play. And they would argue that it is a common concern and not only a national concern. And here again, we are in the middle of a political dispute between fractions within the Eurozone that become increasingly clear. So I think I've put on the table some of the major political points that are up for debate. As a bottom line of all this, I think we can say that the Eurozone has reacted well to the economic and financial crisis when it had to send out its fire brigades. The European Central Bank did a very good and swift job. After long debates, we got to a point where at least we can say there was some kind of coordination in the 2 points Dr. Merz mentioned. First of all, fiscal stimulus, although that could, of course, been taken forward a lot, but there was a start. And there was also a start in through the Eurozone summit held in fall 2008 on the question of stabilization for the banking sector. But I would conclude that the long-term challenges that really touch on the question what kind of architecture in terms of policy coordination do we need for the Eurozone, we are only starting the discussion. We see even between those large countries within the Eurozone that have a tradition of very close dialogue, which are Germany and France, that for the time being there are different answers to, let's say, the same situation within the Eurozone because the national situations diverge to such a large degree. And what I think is the major task for those countries, but for all members of the Eurozone and for all those that will enter in the years to come, is to start seeing Eurozone problems as Eurozone problems and not uniquely and dominantly from the national perspective. Thank you very much.